The mountains of Montana had always been Jake Morrison's sanctuary, a place where the noise of the modern world faded into the whisper of pine trees and the distant call of eagles soaring overhead. He was 32 years old, lived alone in a cabin he had built with his own hands, and made his living as a wildlife photographer. His work had appeared in magazines and nature documentaries, but fame had never interested him. What Jake wanted was peace, and the wilderness gave him exactly that on this particular evening in late September. He had spent 12 hours tracking a family of elk through the forest, capturing images that would later make editors weep with joy. His muscles ached, his boots were caked with mud, and all he could think about was a hot shower and a warm meal. He parked his truck beside the cabin, grabbed his camera bag, and trudged inside without bothering to turn on many lights. The familiar creak of the wooden floors welcomed him home. Jake dropped his equipment on the kitchen table, kicked off his boots, and headed straight for the bathroom. Steam soon filled the small room as hot water poured from the showerhead, and he stepped under the spray with a grateful sigh. For several minutes, he simply stood there, letting the heat work its magic on his tired body. His eyes were closed, his mind empty of everything except the simple pleasure of being clean and warm. That was when he heard the noise. It was a soft chittering sound, almost like a bird, but not quite. Jake's eyes snapped open, and he listened carefully, wondering if some animal had somehow gotten into the cabin. While he was away, the sound came again, closer this time, and Jake reached for the shower curtain. Just as the bathroom door slowly creaked open, what he saw made him freeze completely. Standing in the doorway was a creature unlike anything Jake had ever seen or imagined. She stood barely 3 feet tall, with scales that shimmered purple and blue under the bathroom light. Delicate wings were folded against her back, and a long tail swished nervously behind her. Her face was vaguely reptilian, but also somehow expressive, with enormous golden eyes that seemed to glow in the steam-filled air. Jake stared at her. Neither of them moved for what felt like an eternity. The tiny dragon-like being clutched something against her chest, a device of some kind that sparked and flickered with damaged circuitry. Her entire body was trembling, and Jake realized with sudden clarity that she was absolutely terrified. "You are," she said, her voice high-pitched but surprisingly clear. "Without your outer skin?" Jake's brain finally kicked back into gear. He grabbed the nearest towel and wrapped it around his waist so fast he nearly slipped on the wet floor. "What the?" he started, then stopped himself. Yelling would probably make things worse. "Who are you? What are you?" The creature took a hesitant step backward, her wings twitching with fear. "Please, do not harm me," she whispered. "I am Zira of the Draconith. My vessel crashed in your forest territory. I detected heat signatures and saw shelter. I did not mean to intrude upon your cleaning ritual." Jake's mind raced through possibilities. He was a man who had spent his life observing the natural world, documenting creatures great and small. Nothing in his experience had prepared him for this. Yet somehow his instincts told him this was real. This was actually happening. "Okay," he said slowly, keeping his voice calm. "Okay, Zira, I'm Jake. I'm not going to hurt you." Zira's enormous eyes studied him with obvious suspicion. "Humans are known to be violent," she said. "My people have observed your species from afar for many cycles. Your history is filled with war and destruction." "Fair point," Jake admitted. "But right now, I'm more confused than violent. Can you give me a minute to put on some clothes? Then maybe we can talk about this like civilized beings." Zira tilted her head, considering his words. Her fear seemed to decrease slightly, replaced by curiosity. "You wish to communicate rather than attack?" "That's generally my first choice, yeah." The tiny alien nodded slowly and stepped back from the doorway. "I will wait, but know that I am not defenseless. My claws contain venom that can paralyze creatures much larger than myself. Good to know, Jake said. I'll keep my hands where you can see them. He waited until Zira moved into the hallway, then quickly dried off and threw on jeans and a flannel shirt. His heart was pounding, but he forced himself to breathe steadily. Panic would not help anyone when he emerged from the bathroom. He found Zira standing in his small living room, examining everything with wide-eyed fascination. She touched the spine of a book on his shelf, flinched away from the cold surface of a window, and sniffed cautiously at a bowl of fruit on the counter. Your dwelling is primitive, she observed, but not without charm. Jake couldn't help but laugh. Thanks, I think. He moved slowly to the kitchen and began filling a kettle with water. Zira watched his every move with intense focus, ready to bolt at any sign of danger. Are you hungry? Jake asked. Thirsty? I don't know what your species eats, but I can offer tea, water, or some leftover soup. Zira's expression shifted to something like confusion. You would share resources with an unknown intruder? You're not really an intruder, Jake said. More like an unexpected guest. Besides, you're hurt and scared. Where I come from, we help people in that situation, even if those people are not human. Even then, Jake set the kettle on the stove and turned to face her properly. She really was tiny, barely reaching his waist. Her scales caught the light beautifully, shifting colors as she moved. Despite her alien appearance, there was something almost endearing about her. He couldn't stop looking at her, not out of fear or threat, but pure amazement. This was first contact. This was the moment humanity had dreamed about for centuries, and it was happening in his cabin. With a 3-foot dragon girl who had walked in on him in the shower, the universe had a strange sense of humor. Tell me about your crash, Jake said gently. Maybe I can help? Zira's defensive posture softened just a fraction. She looked down at the damaged device in her hands, then back up at Jake. My navigation systems failed, she said. I was mapping the sector of the galaxy when the malfunction occurred. My ship is destroyed. I have no way to contact my people. No distress signal? My beacon was damaged in the impact. I have been trying to repair it, but I lack the necessary tools. Jake nodded thoughtfully. I'm pretty handy with repairs. No promises with alien technology, but I'm willing to try. First, though, let's get you warm and fed. You look like you're about to fall over. Zira's golden eyes glistened with something that might have been emotion. Why would you help me? Your species has no reason to trust mine. We have never made contact with your world. Jake shrugged and poured hot water into 2 mugs. Because you need help, he said simply. That's reason enough for me. For the first time since she had appeared in his bathroom doorway, Zira's trembling stopped. She looked at this strange tall human with new eyes, seeing not a threat but something she had never expected. To find on this primitive world kindness, perhaps the Draconith had been wrong about humans after all. Jake handed the warm mug to Zira, who wrapped her small clawed hands around it and inhaled the steam rising from the liquid. Her golden eyes widened with surprise. This scent is pleasant, she said. What substance is this? Chamomile tea, Jake replied, settling into a chair across from her. It helps with relaxation. Figured you could use some after the day you've had. Zira took a tiny sip and made a chirping sound that Jake interpreted as approval. She had perched herself on a kitchen chair, her tail hanging over the edge and swaying gently. The dish towel Jake had offered her was now wrapped around her shoulders like a tiny cape. Your dwelling produces heat without fire, Zira observed, glancing at the radiator in the corner. Impressive for a species that has not yet achieved interstellar travel. We're working on it, Jake said with a slight smile. Give us another century or two. Zira set down her mug and studied, Jake with the intensity of a scientist examining a new specimen. You are remarkably calm, she said. I have read reports about human reactions to the unknown. Your species typically responds with fear and aggression. Those reports might be a bit outdated, Jake said. Or maybe I'm just too tired to panic properly. Either way, you're here. You need help. And screaming won't change anything. A logical perspective. I have my moments. Silence fell between them, but it was not uncomfortable. Jake sipped his own tea while Zira continued to examine her surroundings. Her eyes lingered on the photographs hanging on the walls, images Jake had captured over years of work in the wilderness. These are your creations? She asked, pointing at a stunning shot of a grizzly bear fishing in a river. Yeah, it's my job. I photograph wildlife. You preserve moments of beauty, Zira said softly. The Draconith have similar traditions. We believe that capturing an image is a form of honoring the subject. Jake felt a spark of connection at her words. That's exactly how I see it. Zira's expression changed, becoming more open. Perhaps our species are not so different after all. Maybe not, Jake agreed. Now, tell me more about the Draconith. I'm curious about where you come from. Zira settled more comfortably in her chair and began to speak. Her voice took on a storytelling quality, and Jake found himself captivated to Draconith. She explained, came from a world called Verith Prime, a planet of vast forests and towering mountains, not entirely unlike Earth. Their civilization was ancient, spanning over 50,000 years of recorded history. They had achieved space travel long before humans had discovered fire. We are explorers by nature, Zira said. My role is that of a cartographer. I map unexplored regions of the galaxy, documenting new worlds and potential resources. And you were mapping this area when your ship crashed. Correct. Earth has been on our observation list for many centuries. Your planet is considered off-limits for direct contact due to your species' volatile nature. Jake raised an eyebrow. Volatile? Your wars, Zira said simply. Your weapons. Your history of violence against each other and against your own world. The Draconith Council determined that humanity was too dangerous to approach. That's fair, Jake admitted. We haven't exactly been gentle with each other on the planet, yet you have shown me only kindness, Zira said, her head tilting with curiosity. You found an alien being in your bathing chamber and offered her tea instead of violence. This does not match the data we have collected, Jake shrugged. Data doesn't tell the whole story. Yeah, humans can be terrible. We've done awful things throughout history. But we can also be generous and compassionate and brave. We're complicated. Complicated, Zira repeated, as if tasting the word. Yes, I am beginning to understand this. She reached for the damaged device she had been carrying and held it up for Jake to see. It was roughly the size of a smartphone but shaped like an oval, with intricate patterns etched into its surface. Several parts were clearly broken, with exposed wires and cracked components. This is my emergency beacon, Zira explained. If I can repair it, I can signal my people for rescue. Without it, I am stranded on your world indefinitely. Jake leaned forward to examine the device. May I? Zira hesitated, then carefully placed the beacon in Jake's hands. He turned it over, studying the damage with the eye of someone who had spent years fixing broken equipment in remote locations. Some of these circuits look similar to our technology, he said. Different materials, but the same basic principles. I have tools in my workshop. No guarantees, but I might be able to help. You would do this for me? I said I would, didn't I? Zira's wings fluttered slightly, a gesture Jake was starting to recognize as emotional response. Among the Draconith, offering assistance to a stranger creates a bond of obligation. Are you prepared to accept such a bond? Jake considered this. If helping you means I'm connected to your people somehow, I can live with that. Seems like a small price for doing the right thing. You continue to surprise me, Jake Morrison. Stick around, he said with a grin. I'm full of surprises. They spent the next hour discussing the beacon's mechanics. Zira explained which components were essential and which could be bypassed. Her knowledge of technology far exceeded Jake's, but his practical experience with repairs proved valuable in unexpected ways. Your solution is crude but effective, Zira said when Jake suggested using copper wire from an old lamp to replace a damaged connection. The Draconith would never consider such improvisation. Sometimes crude gets the job done. As the night grew late, Jake noticed Zira struggling to keep her eyes open. Her small body was clearly exhausted from the crash and the stress of her situation. You need to rest, he said. The beacon can wait until morning. I should remain vigilant, Zira protested weakly. This environment is unknown to me. I'm not going to hurt you, Jake said firmly. And nothing outside is going to get through that door. You're safe here, Zira. I give you my word. Something in his tone must have reached her, because Zira's resistance faded. Very well, she said. But I will sleep lightly. Jake set up a makeshift bed for her on the couch, using extra blankets and pillows to create a nest-like arrangement. Zira examined it with approval. This is acceptable, she said, climbing into the soft pile. Your nesting materials are surprisingly comfortable. Glad you approve. Jake retreated to his own room, but left the door open, just in case Zira needed anything during the night. As he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the reality of the situation finally hit him. There was an alien in his living room. An actual alien from another planet. Tomorrow he would wake up and help her repair a beacon that would signal beings from across the galaxy. His quiet life in the mountains had just become very interesting, despite the strangeness of it all. Jake found himself smiling in the darkness. Fear was the last thing on his mind. Instead, he felt something he had not experienced in years. Wonder the universe had sent a tiny dragon girl crashing into his world, and somehow that felt like exactly what he needed. The morning sun crept through the cabin windows and painted golden stripes across the wooden floor. Jake woke to the smell of something burning and immediately jumped out of bed. He rushed into the kitchen to find Zira standing on a chair, poking at the toaster with a wooden spoon while smoke billowed from its slots. This device is hostile, she declared when she saw Jake. I attempted to warm bread and it attacked me with flames. Jake quickly unplugged the toaster and fanned the smoke away with a dish towel. It's not hostile. You probably set it too high. The bread needs to toast, not catch fire. Zira looked deeply offended. On Verith Prime, our food preparation technology does not attempt to burn our dwellings. Welcome to Earth, Jake said with a laugh, where even breakfast can be an adventure. He took over cooking duties and prepared a simple meal of eggs, fresh toast without fire this time, and orange juice. Zira watched every step with fascination, her golden eyes tracking his movements like a hawk observing prey. You prepare sustenance with your own hands, she observed. Do you not have automated systems for such tasks? I could, Jake said, sliding a plate in front of her. But I like cooking. There's something satisfying about making food yourself. Zira examined the eggs with suspicion before taking a small bite. Her expression transformed instantly into pure delight. These are extraordinary. What creature produces such delicious spheres? Chickens. They're birds. Pretty common around here. We must discuss trade agreements for these chicken creatures, Zira said seriously, taking another enthusiastic bite. The Draconith Council would be most interested, Jake grinned. I'll make a note of that. After breakfast, they moved to Jake's workshop, a small shed behind the cabin filled with tools, spare parts, and various half-finished projects. Zira surveyed the space with obvious curiosity. Your technology is primitive, she said, picking up a wrench and examining it. But there is an elegance to its simplicity. Primitive gets the job done, Jake replied. Now, let's see about that beacon. They worked together throughout the morning, with Zero providing technical guidance and Jake handling the physical repairs. It was slow going, as many of the alien components had no earthly equivalent. But they made progress through creative improvisation at one point. Jake needed a specific type of conductor that Zero described as essential for the beacon's power system. After thinking for a moment, he disappeared into the cabin and returned with a handful of copper coins. Will these work? He asked Jira analyze the coins with a small scanning device that had survived the crash. The copper content is sufficient, she said with surprise. How did you know? Lucky guess. Plus, I remember reading that copper is a great conductor. Figured it was worth a shot. Your intuition is remarkable for a species so young in the cosmos. Jake shrugged. We learn fast. It's kind of our thing. By midday, they had completed roughly half of the necessary repairs. Jake's hands were dirty with alien grease and earthly grime, but he felt a sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with his usual photography work. They took a break and sat on the cabin porch, watching the forest that surrounded Jake's property. A family of deer grazed in the meadow nearby, and Zero watched them with wonder. Your world is beautiful, she said softly. I have visited many planets, but few have such diversity of life. It's why I live out here, Jake said. The city is too crowded, too noisy. Here I can breathe. The Draconith once lived in harmony with nature as well, Zero said. But as our civilization advanced, we became disconnected from our world. Everything is technology now. Everything is efficient and sterile. Sounds lonely, Zero nodded slowly. It can be. That is why I became an explorer. I wanted to see places untouched by our progress. Jake understood that feeling more than he could express. He had chosen this life for similar reasons. Escaping the march of modernity for something simpler and more real. You know, he said. You're pretty easy to talk to for an alien. Zero made that chirping sound again. The one Jake had learned meant amusement. And you are surprisingly pleasant for a dangerous human. I try. In the afternoon, Jake decided to show Zero more of his world. He took her on a walk through the forest, pointing out different plants and animals along the way. Zero recorded everything with her scanning device, creating detailed notes that she said would be invaluable to Draconith scientists. They stopped by a stream where crystal-clear water flowed over smooth stones. Zero knelt at the edge and dipped her clawed hand into the current. It is cold, she observed, and clean. On many industrialized worlds, water like this no longer exists. We're working on protecting what we have left, Jake said. It's an uphill battle, but people are starting to understand. Perhaps there is hope for your species after all. We're stubborn like that. Zero stood and looked up at Jake with an expression he could not quite read. I must confess something, she said. Before my crash, I believed the reports about humanity. I expected to find violent primitives who would either fear me or try to harm me. Instead, I found you. I'm just one person, Jake said. Not exactly a representative sample, perhaps not, Zero agreed. But you have shown me that the reports are incomplete. Humans are capable of great kindness. This changes everything. How so? When I return to my people, I will present a new assessment of your species. I will recommend that the Draconith reconsider their policy of isolation. Perhaps it is time for formal contact. Jake felt the weight of her words settle on his shoulders. That's a big deal. It is. First contact between civilizations is always a turning point in history. And it began because a kind human offered a frightened alien tea and helped her repair her beacon. When you put it like that, it sounds almost significant. Zero's wings spread slightly, catching the afternoon light. It is significant, Jake Morrison. More than you know. They walked back to the cabin as the sun began its descent toward the mountains. The world was peaceful and quiet, with no hint of the momentous events unfolding in this remote corner of Montana. Jake had no way of knowing that his simple acts of kindness would echo across the stars. But somehow he sensed that his life would never be the same, and strangely, he was okay with that. 5 days had passed since Zira crashed into Jake's life, and the tiny dragon girl had become a fixture in his cabin that he could no longer imagine being without. They had fallen into a comfortable routine. Mornings were spent working on the beacon, afternoons exploring the wilderness, and evenings sitting on the porch sharing stories about their vastly different worlds. Jake taught Zira about human customs, while Zira described the wonders of the galaxy. On the 5th morning, something extraordinary happened. Jake was in the workshop, soldering the final connections on the beacon's power core, when Zira let out a sharp cry of excitement. The device in her hands began to glow with a soft blue light, and a gentle humming filled the air. "It's working," she breathed. "Jake, it's actually working." He set down his tools and watched as Zira pressed a sequence of buttons on the beacon's surface. A holographic display projected from the device, showing symbols and patterns that meant nothing to Jake, but clearly meant everything to Zira. "The signal is transmitting," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "My people will receive this within standard time units. A rescue vessel should arrive within 12 of your hours." "That's great," Jake said, genuinely happy for her. "You're going home." But as the words left his mouth, he noticed something strange. Zira's wings, which usually fluttered with excitement, had gone completely still. Her golden eyes were fixed on the holographic display, but she did not look joyful. She looked conflicted. "Zira?" Jake asked. "Is everything okay?" The tiny alien did not respond immediately. She stared at the beacon for a long moment, then slowly turned to face him. "I should be overjoyed," she said quietly. "This is what I wanted. To return to my people, to continue my work, to leave this primitive world behind. But I find myself feeling something unexpected," Zira admitted. "Sadness. Reluctance. I do not wish to leave." Jake felt a warmth spread through his chest at her words. "I'll miss you too," he said honestly. "These past few days have been weird, but also kind of amazing. You have shown me a side of humanity that I never expected to find," Zira said. "Kindness without expectation of reward. Generosity to a stranger who could offer nothing in return. These are rare qualities in any species. I'm not that special," Jake said with a slight shrug. "Most people would have done the same." "I do not believe that is true," Zira replied. "But I appreciate your humility." They spent the remaining hours together, knowing their time was short. Jake cooked one final meal for Zira, introducing her to the wonders of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Her reaction was one of pure ecstasy. "This combination should not work," she said between bites. "The textures are wrong, the flavors clash, and yet somehow it is perfect. That's humanity in a nutshell," Jake laughed. "Things that shouldn't work somehow do." As evening approached, they sat on the porch and watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange, pink, and purple. Zira recorded the image on her device, adding it to her growing collection of Earth memories. "I will never forget this world," she said softly. "Or you, Jake Morrison, what will you tell your people about us?" Jake Ascajiro was silent for a moment, organizing her thoughts. "I will tell them the truth," she finally said. "That humans are complicated beings capable of both great destruction and great compassion. That your species is young and makes many mistakes, but also learns and grows with remarkable speed. That you built civilizations with your bare hands before you had technology to assist you. Sounds like a mixed review." "It is an honest one," Zira said. "But I will also tell them about you specifically. About a man who found a frightened alien in his bathing chamber and chose kindness over fear. About someone who worked for days to help a stranger return home without asking for anything in return. Jake felt uncomfortable with the praise. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," Zira said firmly. "You did what a good person would do. There is a difference." She reached into a small pouch at her side and withdrew something that glinted in the fading light. It was a crystal pendant on a delicate chain, glowing with inner luminescence. "This is a communication beacon," Zira explained, pressing it into Jake's palm. "It is paired to my personal frequency. If you ever need assistance, if your world faces a threat you cannot handle alone, activate this device, and I will answer." "Zira, I can't accept this." "You must," she insisted. Among the Draconith, such gifts represent the highest form of trust and connection. Refusing would be a grave insult. Jake looked at the pendant, then at Zira's earnest face. "Okay," he said. "I'll keep it safe. I know you will." The sky had grown dark, and the first stars were beginning to appear when Jake heard a sound he had never heard before. It was like music and machinery combined, a harmonic hum that seemed to resonate in his very bones. "They are here," Zira said. Rising from her seat, a light appeared over the tree line, descending slowly toward the clearing behind Jake's cabin. It was a ship, sleek and elegant in design, glowing with soft blue light that illuminated the forest like a second moon. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as the vessel touched down without a sound. A ramp extended from its side, and 3 figures emerged into the night. They were Draconith like Zira, but larger, standing perhaps 4 feet tall. Their scales ranged from silver to deep emerald, and they moved with careful precision. The one in front had obvious authority in his bearing. "That is Commander Vorn," Zira whispered to Jake. "He leads this sector's rescue operations. He is respected but known for his cautious nature toward unknown species." Jake nodded, understanding the warning in her words. He would need to be careful when approached them, his golden eyes scanning Jake with obvious suspicion. "Cartographer Zira," he said in a formal tone. "We received your beacon signal. You appear unharmed." "I am well, Commander," Zira replied, matching his formality. "Thanks to this human, Jake Morrison. He provided shelter, sustenance, and assistance in repairing my beacon." Vorn's gaze returned to Jake, studying him with new interest. "Is this true, human? You aided one of our kind without compensation?" Jake met the commander's eyes steadily. She needed help. That was reason enough. A long silence stretched between them. Vorn's expression was unreadable, but Jake sensed he was being evaluated in ways he could not fully comprehend. "Interesting," Vorn finally said. "Perhaps the Draconith have underestimated your species. Zira mentioned that your people think we're dangerous," Jake said carefully. "And I won't pretend that's entirely wrong. But we're also capable of being better than our worst moments." Vorn tilted his head, a gesture remarkably similar to Zira's habit. "Wisdom and honesty from a human. This is unexpected. We're full of surprises," Jake replied for the first time. Something like approval flickered in Vorn's eyes. "Indeed you are." The Draconith vessel hummed softly in the clearing, casting ethereal blue light across the Montana forest. Jake stood facing Commander Vorn and the other 2 rescue officers, while Zira remained at his side, her small form barely reaching his waist. "Cartographer Zira," Vorn said, turning to address her formally. "Your report on this world and its inhabitants will be of great interest to the Council. What assessment will you provide?" Zira straightened her posture, and Jake was struck by how different she appeared now. The frightened creature who had stumbled into his bathroom 5 days ago had transformed into a confident representative of her species. "I recommend immediate revision of our non-contact policy regarding Earth," she said clearly. "The humans have been misjudged. While their history contains violence and conflict, they also demonstrate remarkable capacity for kindness, creativity, and growth. This individual, she gestured toward Jake, is evidence that humanity deserves reconsideration. Vorn's silver scales caught the light as he turned his attention back to Jake. You sheltered one of our own, he said. You repaired her beacon using primitive tools and materials. You asked for nothing in return. The Draconith do not forget such debts. She wasn't a debt, Jake replied calmly. She was a guest. That's what we do where I come from. One of the other Draconith officers, a female with emerald scales, stepped forward. Commander, I have scanned this human's dwelling and surrounding territory. There are no weapons, no defensive systems, no evidence of hostile intent. He speaks truthfully. Vorn nodded slowly, then did something that surprised Jake. He lowered his head in gesture that was unmistakably respectful. Jake Morrison of Earth, Vorn said. On behalf of the Draconith Exploration Fleet, I offer you our gratitude. Your actions have demonstrated that first contact need not be violent or fearful. Does that mean you'll be visiting again? Jake asked. That remains to be determined by the Council, Vorn replied. But I will personally advocate for further contact with your world. Cartographer Zira's report, combined with my own observations tonight, suggests that humanity may be ready for a place in the galactic community. The weight of those words settled on Jake's shoulders. He was just a wildlife photographer from Montana, and somehow he had become Earth's unofficial ambassador to an alien civilization. No pressure, he muttered under his breath. Zira heard him and made her chirping laugh. She then stepped toward him, her golden eyes glistening with emotion that transcended species. Thank you, Jake, she said, for everything. For the tea and the sandwiches and the terrible jokes. For treating me like a friend instead of an intruder. For showing me that my people were wrong about yours. Hey, Jake said, kneeling down to meet her at eye level. Thank you for crashing in my forest. This has been the most interesting week of my life. Zira reached out and placed her small clawed hand against Jake's much larger palm. The beacon I gave you works both ways, she said. I can also use it to contact you. Expect to hear from me, Jake Morrison. I am very curious to learn more about these chickens and their delicious fears. Jake laughed. I'll have an egg report ready for you. She smiled, and despite her alien features, it was a smile Jake recognized. Warmth, affection, the bittersweet feeling of saying goodbye to a friend. Cartographer. Vorn called from the vessel's ramp. We must depart. The Council awaits your report. Zira nodded and began walking toward the ship, but halfway there she stopped and turned back. Jake, she called. When my people ask what single quality defines humanity, what should I tell them? Jake considered the question carefully. Tell them we're dreamers, he finally said. We look up at the stars and imagine what might be. We reach for things beyond our grasp because we believe we can touch them someday. That's what makes us who we are. Zira's wings spread slightly, catching the light of the vessel behind her. Dreamers, she repeated. Yes, I think the Council will understand that very well. She climbed the ramp and disappeared into the ship, followed by the other officers. Commander Vorn was the last to board, pausing at the entrance to look back at Jake one final time. May fortune favor your world, Jake Morrison, he said. I suspect we will meet again. Then he was gone, and the ramp closed behind him. Jake stepped back as the vessel began to rise, silently lifting from the clearing with a grace that defied physics. Blue light washed over the forest as it ascended, growing smaller and smaller until it was just another point of light among the stars, and then it was gone. Jake stood alone in the darkness, the crystal pendant warm against his chest, where he had tucked it inside his shirt. The forest was silent around him, as if the whole world was holding its breath. He looked up at the sky, at the countless stars that now seemed less distant than they had a week ago. Somewhere out there, a tiny dragon girl was racing toward her homeworld, carrying stories of humanity that would shape the future of two civilizations. Safe travels. Zira, he said softly. The walk back to his cabin felt different. The familiar path through the trees was the same, but Jake was not. He had been changed by the experience in ways he was only beginning to understand inside. The cabin was quiet. Zira's nest of blankets on the couch had been left behind, and Jake found himself reluctant to put them away. They were evidence that the last 5 days had actually happened, that he had not simply dreamed the whole thing. He sat down at his kitchen table and noticed something Zira had left behind. It was her personal log device, smaller than his palm, with a note scratched into the surface using her claws. For you. So you can share our story when the time is right. Jake smiled and carefully placed the device in his desk drawer. One day he would figure out how to access its contents. But for now, it was enough to know that he had proof that humanity was not alone in the universe. Proof that kindness could bridge even the vast distances between stars. Proof that a simple act of compassion could change everything. He made himself a cup of chamomile tea, just like the first one he had shared with Zira, and walked out to the porch. The night was clear and cold, and the stars burned bright above the mountains. Somewhere out there, the Draconith Council would soon hear about Earth and its strange, stubborn, dreaming inhabitants. Somewhere out there, decisions were being made that could affect the future of all humanity, and it had started here. In a small cabin in Montana, with a surprised human and a frightened alien meeting in the most awkward way possible, Jake raised his mug toward the sky. To first contact, he said. May all the ones that follow be just as interesting. He stayed on the porch until dawn began to lighten the eastern horizon, watching the stars fade one by one. The pendant against his chest pulsed gently. As if responding to his thoughts, the universe had gotten a whole lot bigger. But somehow Jake felt less alone than he had in years. Humanity's place among the stars had begun with kindness. And Jake Morrison, wildlife photographer, had been there to witness it. It seemed like a pretty good story to tell someday.